The towering arena hummed with energy as spectators from every corner of the galaxy filled the grandstands, their eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before them. It was an arena of both reverence and danger, where the mightiest warriors from countless civilizations came to prove their worth. Today, the crowd was restless, eagerly awaiting the moment when a duel would begin, a duel that had never been seen before. The stakes were higher than ever, the tension in the air almost palpable. Across the polished stone floor, two figures stood, each representing a world apart. On one side was a being whose very presence seemed to alter the atmosphere. His skin shimmered with a faint iridescent glow, the product of alien biology honed for centuries by warriors who prided themselves on battle. The duel master, known as Zathar'Kahl, was a legend in his own time, an undefeated champion, his name whispered in fear across star systems. His race, the Ailriths, had mastered every known form of combat, perfecting techniques passed down through eons of martial tradition. Zathar'Kahl was not merely a fighter. He was a living weapon, revered for his speed, strength, and unshakable precision. His eyes, cold and calculating, surveyed the arena, his stance already exuding an unspoken superiority. Opposite him stood a human, an outsider, a wild card. The crowd had already made their judgment before he even drew his sword. Humans were primitive compared to the Ailriths, their combat abilities unrefined. There was nothing remarkable about this man, no enhancements or advanced technology that could level the playing field. He was nothing more than a simple swordsman, one who had earned his place in this galactic tournament by sheer determination and skill. His name was Zathar'Kahl, and though he stood at a mere average height by human standards, his demeanor held an undeniable confidence. His movements were deliberate, his face calm, as if he had faced many battles and survived them all. But even the most optimistic observers couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. No human had ever come close to matching an Ailrith in combat. Zathar'Kahl's lips curled into a slight, almost dismissive smile as he sized up his opponent. The human was resolute, but that was the only compliment he could offer. To Zathar'Kahl, it was an unspoken truth that no matter the opponent, his victory was inevitable. After all, what could a mere human do in the face of centuries of refined martial expertise? His fists clenched, prepared to deliver the swift, unrelenting strikes that had crushed thousands of opponents before. Nathaniel didn't flinch. His hand was steady as he gripped the hilt of his sword, the blade of which was forged from a rare metal found only on Earth. The sword was a masterpiece of human craftsmanship, light yet strong, perfect for a combat style that favored speed and precision. Unlike the alien's glowing aura, his weapon was simple. No energy blades, no shifting forms. Just steel. Yet for Nathaniel, it was everything. It had been passed down from his ancestors, a symbol of the warrior's honor. The crowd quieted as the announcer's voice rang through the arena, signaling the start of the duel. The atmosphere became heavy, charged with anticipation. Zathar'Kahl gave a small nod of acknowledgement, his posture unchanged. He was a master, and he knew it. Nathaniel, on the other hand, stood rooted to the spot, eyes focused solely on his opponent, as if already in the midst of battle. The first strike came quickly, too fast for the untrained eye to follow. Zathar'Kahl's arm blurred, his movements a fluid, seamless combination of speed and power. His blade, a shimmering, razor-sharp weapon forged from the finest Ailrith alloy, sliced through the air with a sound like thunder. It was meant to end the duel in an instant, an overwhelming blow to demonstrate his superiority. Yet Nathaniel was already moving, his body twisted just out of reach, his feet gliding across the ground as he sidestepped with fluid grace. The crowd gasped. They had not expected the human to react so swiftly. Zathar'Kahl paused for a fraction of a second, his eyes narrowing. He had not expected the human to evade. It was no small feat. Most of his opponents would have crumpled beneath his first attack, unable to even perceive it. Yet this human was different. For a brief moment, the alien wondered if perhaps there was more to this human than met the eye. Nathaniel, however, did not pause. He took a single step forward, his sword raised and ready. It wasn't an attack, but a challenge. His eyes locked on his Zathar'Kahl's, unflinching, his expression calm. The message was clear. I'm still here, and I'm not afraid. Zathar'Kahl tilted his head, almost intrigued. He had seen many warriors in his lifetime, but none like this. None who could stand before him with such composure, as if the impending death was not a fear to them. It was in some twisted way almost impressive. He had always thought of humans as weak, unworthy of his attention. Now, in the face of this one human swordsman, something was changing. He could not deny it. There was something more to this encounter than he had anticipated. The duel continued. Zathar'Kahl unleashed a series of rapid strikes, his blade flashing in the light, creating a storm of deadly arcs. Nathaniel deflected them one after the other, his movements seemingly effortless. With each blocked blow, he gained more ground, more confidence. The alien strikes were powerful, yet they lacked the precision of a true master. He relied too heavily on overwhelming force, on intimidating speed. The human, on the other hand, seemed to read every motion, his sword a blur of parries and ripostes. The crowd's murmurs turned into quiet awe. They could not understand what was happening, but it was clear. The human was not being overwhelmed. He was holding his ground. For the first time in his career, Zathar'Kahl felt the bitter taste of doubt creeping into his thoughts. In that moment, as their swords clashed once again, the duel shifted. It wasn't about power anymore. It wasn't about skill or technique. It was about something else, something that Zathar'Kahl had yet to comprehend. As the clash of blades echoed throughout the arena, the tension between the two fighters grew thicker. Neither one was willing to back down. The outcome of this duel had yet to be written, and the crowd, now hanging on every movement, understood one undeniable truth. The fight had only just begun. Zathar'Kahl took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he recentered himself. The human had managed to land a blow, though it was a glancing strike. But the alien's pride had taken a much deeper wound. His mind raced, calculating the variables, the human strategy, his movements, and the unsettling calmness that Nathaniel displayed in the face of such overwhelming force. In all his years, Zathar'Kahl had never encountered an opponent who didn't fold under pressure, who didn't crumble when faced with the crushing weight of an Ailrith warrior's might. Yet here stood Nathaniel, unfazed, his sword still held firmly in his grasp, eyes sharp with focus. The realization began to dawn that this would not be as simple as every other duel he had fought. The alien flexed his fingers, feeling the hum of energy through his arm, his muscles coiled and ready. With a swift motion, he launched forward again, his sword arcing through the air with an almost predatory precision. He had underestimated the human's resilience, but that mistake would not happen again. He would overwhelm him with pure force, end this fight before it escalated any further. The crowd watched in silence, sensing the shift in intensity as Zathar'Kahl began to move with a calculated fury, each strike landing like the crash of thunder. But Nathaniel was ready. The human sword met the alien's in a clash of ringing steel, sparks flying as the blades connected. It was the kind of force that could break lesser men, and yet Nathaniel stood firm, his posture steady. He did not push back, nor did he retreat. He absorbed the blow, using his body's natural motion to deflect the full force of Zathar'Kahl's strike. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Nathaniel's lips, though it was not one of arrogance. It was the quiet satisfaction of a mind that had understood the rules of the game. Zathar'Kahl's eyes flashed with renewed aggression. The human's defenses were sound, but they were too passive. A good defense could only hold for so long before it gave way. He struck again, faster this time, his blade a whirl of silver as he pressed Nathaniel back, his strikes growing more forceful. He moved like a storm, his form a blur of motion designed to strike with the inevitability of nature itself. But Nathaniel didn't falter. He danced around each of the alien's blows, not with brute strength, but with an almost calculated elegance. Zathar'Kahl's frustration grew. He was faster, stronger, more skilled, and yet this human, this mere human, was dodging, parrying, and countering every strike with unnatural ease. It wasn't just his skill, it was something deeper. He wasn't merely reacting. He was anticipating Zathar'Kahl's every move, as though he had already fought him 100 times over. Each moment, each strike, brought Zathar'Kahl closer to the realization that his normal strategies, honed over centuries of battle, weren't enough. The human had a way of remaining unpredictable, of keeping Zathar'Kahl off balance. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled the alien warrior. In the heat of battle, a fighter's rhythm was paramount. It was that rhythm that allowed Zathar'Kahl to control the flow of combat, to dictate the pace and direction of every duel. But Nathaniel was disrupting it. Every time the alien thought he had him cornered, Nathaniel would slip away, his movements fluid and precise. The human wasn't just blocking his attacks. He was reading them, understanding the subtleties of Zathar'Kahl's style with an uncanny accuracy. Zathar'Kahl struck again, faster than the eye could follow, his blade flashing through the air in a series of rapid cuts. Each blow was designed to overwhelm, to disorient, to shatter the human's defense. Yet once more Nathaniel evaded. His sword met the alien's once again, a brief clash of steel, before he stepped aside with a fluidity that seemed almost effortless. Zathar'Kahl's blade sliced through empty air as Nathaniel shifted behind him, his own blade poised for a strike. The alien's muscles burned with the effort, but his pride was still intact. He had fought opponents from every corner of the galaxy, each one unique in their combat style. But this human was different. There was something about him, something in his movements that Zathar'Kahl had never encountered. His blows were not as powerful as the aliens, but they were precise, sharp, and unerringly quick. Zathar'Kahl gritted his teeth, refusing to acknowledge the growing sense of doubt. He would not be bested by this human. Not here, not today. But even as the thought crossed his mind, Nathaniel saw it, saw the flicker of hesitation in Zathar'Kahl's eyes. The alien was not perfect. For the first time, Nathaniel took a step forward. He closed the distance between them, his sword raised in a fluid motion that was almost too fast to follow. Zathar'Kahl's instincts kicked in, his blade coming up to intercept the human's attack. The two swords met again with a resounding clash, but this time, Nathaniel's form was different. There was a subtle change in his stance, a shift in his focus. It was no longer just about defense, no longer just about surviving the alien's onslaught. This was the moment Nathaniel had been waiting for. With a deft twist of his wrist, he shifted his blade, deflecting Zathar'Kahl's strike to the side, leaving the alien momentarily exposed. Nathaniel took advantage of the opening, his sword darting forward in a swift, precise thrust towards Zathar'Kahl's side. The alien reacted with lightning speed, but the human was too close, too fast. The tip of Nathaniel's blade grazed the alien's ribcage, leaving a thin line of red across the shining skin. The crowd gasped. It was the first time the Ailrith had been wounded. Zathar'Kahl recoiled, his breath sharp and uneven. For the first time since the duel began, he hesitated. He looked down at the small wound on his side, the blood pooling at the edge of his armor. His mind raced as he processed the unexpected turn of events. The human had wounded him. It was a blow so small, so seemingly insignificant, and yet it held the weight of an entire galaxy's expectations. Nathaniel stood, his sword raised, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't finished yet. Zathar'Kahl's eyes flickered with a dangerous light. He had underestimated this human, but he would not make the same mistake twice. The duel was far from over. Zathar'Kahl's eyes smoldered with barely contained fury. The wound on his side, though minor, was a humiliation that he had not anticipated. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the sting of his pride being wounded by a human. He had entered this duel expecting an easy victory, a demonstration of his superiority, but now he found himself in a situation he had never encountered before, on the defensive, uncertain of his next move. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and for the first time in his long career as a warrior, he felt the cold grip of doubt tightening around his heart. The alien warrior's mind raced, his strategy unraveling. His sword still gleamed with lethal intent, but now it felt like a weight in his hands. He had relied so heavily on the power of his strikes, on the sheer inevitability of his speed and strength. But this human, this swordsman, had cracked through that facade. Zathar'Kahl's eyes shifted to Nathaniel, who stood there, sword raised, his stance calm and controlled, as though he had merely been waiting for the next move. There was no taunt in his gaze, no triumph, just quiet confidence. And that, more than anything, unsettled the alien warrior. Nathaniel, in contrast, showed no sign of fatigue. His breath was steady, his movements precise. He wasn't rushing, he was waiting. His blade rested lightly in his hand, as if he were anticipating the next step in the dance. And that was the key. The human wasn't fighting against Zathar'Kahl. He was fighting with the flow of the battle, adapting to the alien's every move with an intelligence that seemed to transcend raw combat skill. The crowd, which had been silent since the wound had been dealt, murmured with renewed interest. They could feel the shift in the air. The tension between the two combatants was palpable, and for the first time in the duel, the outcome no longer seemed certain. Zathar'Kahl took a step back, his gaze never leaving Nathaniel's. He could not afford to make another mistake. But there was something more pressing now, something he hadn't fully realized until that moment. The human had made him doubt himself. The very foundation of the alien warrior's strength had been built on an unshakable belief in his superiority, his years of experience, his unmatched power, his ability to overwhelm any opponent. But now, in front of all these spectators, that belief was cracking, and with it, the confidence that had made him the undefeated champion of his people. A tremor ran through him, and for a fleeting moment, Zathar'Kahl understood the cost of that doubt. He had been invincible, untouchable, for so long that he had never truly questioned his place in the galaxy. But this human, this man, had forced him to confront a terrifying truth. There was a limit to his power. The very thing that had defined him had become his greatest weakness. His arrogance, his certainty. Nathaniel didn't move. He was patient, waiting for Zathar'Kahl to make the next move. His sword remained steady, though his eyes were sharp, scanning the alien for any sign of weakness. There was no malice in his gaze, no vindictiveness. It wasn't about vengeance for the humiliation of his species. It was simply about the fight. He had no illusions about victory, no expectations of grandeur. He was here to prove something to himself, not to anyone else. Zathar'Kahl's mind churned, but he couldn't find the clarity he needed. His form faltered, his foot shifting slightly, an imperceptible hesitation that would have gone unnoticed in any other battle. But Nathaniel saw it. He saw the change. The alien's confidence had wavered, and it was in that moment of uncertainty that Nathaniel made his move. With a fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, his feet light on the stone floor. Zathar'Kahl, caught off guard by the sudden shift in pace, reacted too late. Nathaniel's blade swept low, a strike aimed not at the alien's body, but at his feet. The move was simple, calculated, and yet it was enough to unbalance the towering warrior. Zathar'Kahl's leg twisted, his balance compromised, and for the briefest moment, he was vulnerable. Nathaniel pressed the advantage. He shifted, his sword aimed at the alien's throat in a swift motion, the tip just grazing the air near Zathar'Kahl's skin. The crowd gasped as they saw it. The human had done what no one had thought possible. He had pushed the mighty Ailrith warrior to the edge, forcing him to recognize his mortality. Zathar'Kahl froze, his blade hovering in the air, his body tense, his chest heaving with the effort of staying upright. His pride, his invincibility, everything that had made him a legend, had been undone in an instant. He stared at the point of Nathaniel's sword, the realization sinking in like a cold weight. This human had bested him, not through strength, but through cunning, through patience, through something Zathar'Kahl had never fully understood until now. The alien warrior's grip on his sword tightened, but his arms felt heavy, the strength draining from his limbs. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of his own vulnerability. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't the unstoppable force he had believed himself to be. He was just another warrior, one who had been outwitted by an opponent who had nothing but his mind and his will to rely on. Zathar'Kahl looked into Nathaniel's eyes. There was no smugness there, no mockery. There was only the quiet understanding that this duel had been won by something more than skill. Nathaniel had understood the truth long before Zathar'Kahl had. With a final, shaky exhale, the alien lowered his sword. The fight had drained from him, not because of the physical blows, but because of the truth that had been revealed in that moment. He had been humbled in a way that no blow could ever accomplish. Nathaniel stepped back, lowering his blade, but keeping it ready. He didn't need to say anything. The duel was over, and Zathar'Kahl knew it. There was nothing left to prove. The fight, the battle of wits and will, had shown him something more important than victory. It had shown him his place. The Ailrith warrior was no longer the master of this fight. He was the student, and the human had been his teacher. The crowd remained silent, waiting for the final act, the declaration of who had truly won. But in that moment, both warriors understood. Victory wasn't always about the strongest, or the fastest, or the most skilled. Sometimes it was about the quietest, the most unassuming. The humbling moment.